Chapter 1. The cracks begin. The silence in the house had become a living entity, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of shared understanding, but the brittle stillness of something broken, something irrevocably lost. Isabel traced the rim of her cold coffee cup, her gaze fixed on the rain streaking down the kitchen window-pane. Each drop felt like a tiny, insistent whisper of what she refused to acknowledge, the growing chasm between her and Mark. They had built this life brick by brick, the charming suburban house, the well-tended garden, the illusion of a perfect, unbreakable bond. 10 years, a decade woven with laughter, whispered dreams, and the comfortable rhythm of two souls intertwined. Or so she had believed. Now the threads were fraying, unraveling with a cruel slowness that was more agonizing than any sudden snap. It started subtly, as these things often do. Mark's late nights at the office became more frequent, his explanations more vague. His phone, once left carelessly on the counter, was now a guarded secret, face down, always within arm's reach. He spoke less, listened less, his eyes holding a distant, unfathomable quality when they did meet hers. Isabel, ever the optimist, dismissed it, as work stress, a temporary phase. She cooked his favorite meals, left him encouraging notes, tried to reignite the spark with gentle touches and whispered invitations. Each effort met with a polite, almost clinical detachment that chilled her to the bone. The first concrete shard of suspicion pierced her on a Tuesday evening. Mark had called, claiming an urgent meeting. Isabel, restless and unable to sleep, had decided to surprise him with a late night snack at the office. She remembered the chill of the autumn air, the comforting weight of the insulated bag in her hand. But when she arrived, his office was dark, the building deserted. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. She called his cell, and he answered, his voice thick with sleep, claiming he'd fallen asleep at his desk. The lie was clumsy, transparent, and it tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't confront him then. Fear, a cold, creeping vine, wrapped around her throat. She was terrified of what she might find, terrified of shattering the fragile peace that still, somehow, clung to their home. Instead, she began to watch, a silent, agonizing surveillance of her own life. She noticed the faint scent of a different perfume on his shirts, a floral note that wasn't hers. She found a stray hair clip, delicate and unfamiliar, tucked beneath the passenger seat of his car. Each discovery was a fresh wound festering in the silence. The name Alice first appeared as a casual mention, a new colleague at Mark's firm. Alice is really good at organizing these projects, he'd said, a little too quickly, a little too brightly. Isabel had nodded, a polite smile fixed on her face, while her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Then, the emails. She hadn't meant to look, not really. But one night, driven by an unbearable ache of suspicion, she had opened his laptop, her fingers trembling as they navigated to his inbox. There they were, not hidden, not encrypted, but brazenly open. Emails between Mark and Alice, at first professional, then increasingly personal. Inside jokes, shared frustrations about work, then compliments, thinly veiled affection, and finally the undeniable plans for late nights that had nothing to do with deadlines, references to our secret. And missing you, the words blurred before her eyes, each one a hammer blow to the carefully constructed edifice of her marriage. The last email, dated just yesterday, was from Alice. Can't wait for the weekend, my love. You chose me, and I'll make sure you never regret it. You chose me. The words echoed in the cavernous space of Isabel's mind, colder and sharper than any blade. He had chosen, not her, not their decade of shared history, their vows, their life. He had chosen Alice. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath, leaving her gasping in the suffocating silence of a home that was no longer hers. The cracks had not just begun, they had fractured the very foundation of her world. Chapter 2. The aftermath, the confrontation, was less a storm and more a slow, agonizing bleed. Isabel didn't scream, didn't throw things. The shock had numbed her, leaving only a hollow ache where her heart used to be. She simply placed the laptop, still open to Alice's email, on the kitchen table when Mark walked in, whistling a tuneless melody, oblivious, his face, when he saw the screen, drained of color. The whistle died in his throat. He looked at the words, then at Isabel, his eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and something else she couldn't quite decipher, a flicker of relief, perhaps, that the charade was over. Isabel, he started, his voice a strained whisper. Don't, she interrupted, her own voice surprisingly steady. though it felt like it belonged to someone else. Don't lie, don't explain, just tell me. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. The silence stretched, pregnant with unspoken truths. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. The evidence was glaring, undeniable. He spoke of feeling unseen, of something missing, of Alice understanding him in a way she, Isabel, supposedly hadn't. The clichés tumbled out, each one a fresh insult, designed to justify his betrayal. He painted himself as the victim, trapped, searching for something more. Then came the choice, not a question, but a statement, delivered with a chilling finality. I've decided to be with Alice. Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. It wasn't a choice between two women, not really. It was a choice against her, against their history, their vows, the future they had meticulously planned. He had weighed her against someone new, someone exciting, and found her wanting. The casual cruelty of his words, devoid of any real remorse for the pain he was inflicting, was a second, deeper betrayal. The days that followed blurred into a nightmarish haze. Mark, surprisingly, didn't leave immediately. He stayed, a ghost in their shared home, waiting for logistics to be sorted, for the dust to settle. This prolonged presence was a torment. Every shared meal was a performance of normalcy, every accidental touch a jolt of revulsion. The house, once a sanctuary, became a battleground of unspoken resentments and simmering anger. Isabel retreated into herself. She moved through the motions of daily life, a hollow doubt shell. Sleep offered no escape, only restless nights haunted by replays of Mark's confession, Alice's smug words. Food tasted like ash. Her reflection in the mirror showed a stranger gaunt, eyes shadowed with unshed tears, a perpetual tremor in her hands. The toxicity seeped into every corner. Mark's passive aggression, his subtle criticisms, his attempts to shift blame onto her for his unhappiness. If we had only. He weaponized her pain, twisting it into a narrative where she was somehow complicit in his infidelity. He'd leave his phone open, just enough for her to see a message from Alice, a calculated cruelty designed to remind her of his choice of her replacement. She tried to talk to him, to understand, to salvage some dignity. But he was a wall, impenetrable and cold. He had already moved on emotionally. He was merely waiting for his physical departure. The love she had nurtured for a decade curdled into a bitter cocktail of hurt, anger, and a profound sense of worthlessness. She had given her all, her heart, her trust, and he had discarded it effortlessly for someone else. The betrayal was not just his actions, but his utter lack of empathy, his callous disregard for her shattered world. This was not just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a psychological war, waged in the quiet confines of their once loving home. Chapter 3. Drowning in despair, Mark finally left, taking with him a suitcase and a decade of shared memories, leaving behind an echoing void. The silence, once suffocating, now felt vast and empty, a chasm she was perpetually falling into. The house, stripped of his presence, felt colder, larger, a monument to a love that had died a slow, painful death. Isabel's world shrank to the confines of those four walls. She stopped answering calls, ignored texts, and let the mail pile up. The vibrant woman who once hosted dinner parties, tended her garden with meticulous care, and laughed easily was gone, replaced by a ghost haunting her own life. Showering felt like an insurmountable task. Eating was a chore, the food tasteless, a mere obligation to keep her body functioning. The psychological toll was immense. Every thought was a cruel loop, replaying Mark's callous words, Alice's triumphant email. She scrutinized every moment of their 10 years together, searching for clues she had missed, for signs of her own inadequacy. Was she not enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not interesting enough? The questions gnawed at her, eroding her self-worth until she felt like a hollow, doubt shell, utterly devoid of value. Her reflection became her enemy. She saw not Isabel, but a woman rejected, abandoned, unloved. Her eyes, once bright with life, were now dull, perpetually shadowed. She avoided mirrors, avoided her own gaze, unable to bear the sight of the wreckage. The concept of self, love, once a distant, abstract idea, now felt like an impossible fantasy. How could she love herself when the person who had vowed to cherish her had so easily discarded her? Sleep, when it came, was fitful and plagued by nightmares. She'd wake in a cold sweat, the phantom weight of Mark's arm around her, only to be plunged back into the stark reality of his absence. The mornings were the worst, the dawn light a cruel reminder that another day had begun. Another day she had to endure the crushing weight of her grief and humiliation. Friends tried to reach out. Sarah, her oldest friend, called daily, her voice laced with concern. "Isabel, please let me come over, just for an hour." Isabel would mumble excuses, feigning a headache, a cold, anything to avoid facing the pity in their eyes, the awkward silences that would inevitably follow her inability to pretend she was okay. She felt like a burden, a broken thing no one could fix. The isolation she imposed upon herself became a self-fulfilling prophecy, deepening her despair. She would sit for hours, staring blankly at the television, the sounds of the world outside muted, distant. The vibrant colors of life had faded to a monochrome existence. The joy she once found in simple things, a good book, a walk in the park, the scent of fresh rain, was gone. All that remained was a pervasive, suffocating sadness, a dark cloud that clung to her, refusing to dissipate. The betrayal had done more than just break her heart. It had shattered her sense of reality, her trust in love, and most devastatingly, her belief in herself. She was adrift in a sea of despair, the shores of healing seemingly impossibly far away, shrouded in a fog of pain and self-loathing. She didn't know how to swim, didn't even know if she wanted to. The darkness was all-consuming, and for a long time it felt like it would be her permanent home. Chapter 4, A Glimmer of Light. The turning point wasn't a grand epiphany, but a whisper, a tiny crack in the impenetrable wall of her despair. It came on a particularly bleak Tuesday, weeks after Mark had left. Isabel was curled on the sofa, the same spot she'd occupied for days, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of stale grief. The television droned on, a meaningless blur of images. The phone rang. It was Sarah again. Isabel stared at the caller ID, a familiar wave of dread washing over her. But this time something shifted. A tiny spark of defiance flickered within her. How long would she let herself drown? How long would she allow Mark's betrayal to define her entire existence? With a shaky hand she answered. "Isabel, oh my God, you answered." Sarah's voice was a mix of relief and concern. "Are you okay? Can I come over? Please, just let me bring you some food." Isabel hesitated. The thought of company was still daunting, the effort of pretending almost unbearable. But then a different thought emerged, sharp and clear. She deserves better than this. Sarah, her loyal, unwavering friend, deserved more than a perpetually grieving, isolated shell. "Okay," Isabel croaked, the word a rusty sound from disuse. "Okay, Sarah, come over." Sarah arrived within the hour, armed with a casserole, a bottle of wine, and a quiet, comforting presence. She didn't press for details, didn't offer platitudes. She simply sat, listened, and shared stories of her own day, mundane and grounding. For the first time in weeks, Isabel felt a tiny thread of connection to the outside world. Later that evening, after Sarah had left, a different kind of silence settled over the house. It wasn't the empty void, but a quieter, more reflective space. Isabel found herself walking through the rooms, not with despair, but with a strange, nascent curiosity. The house was still hers. The garden, though neglected, was still waiting. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. For a fleeting moment she didn't see the rejected woman. She saw the exhaustion, yes, the pain, but also a flicker of resilience in her eyes, a stubborn refusal to completely surrender. The thought that had sparked earlier returned, stronger this time. This isn't who I am. This isn't who I want to be. The next morning she forced herself out of bed before noon. The sun, a rare visitor these past weeks, streamed through the kitchen window. She made herself a proper breakfast, something more than stale toast. As she ate, she found herself looking at the neglected stack of mail. Among the bills and junk, a brightly colored flyer caught her eye. Community art classes rediscover your creative spark. Isabel had always loved to paint, a hobby she'd set aside years ago, first for her career, then for her marriage. The thought of picking up a brush again felt foreign, almost absurd. But then another thought, a powerful counterpoint to the self-doubt. Why not? What do I have to lose? It was a tiny step, barely a shuffle, but it was forward. The idea of healing, once an abstract concept, began to take on a faint outline. It wouldn't be easy. The pain was still a raw, throbbing wound. But for the first time since the betrayal, Isabel felt a tremor of possibility, a faint glimmer of light at the end of a very long, very dark tunnel. The journey back to herself, she realized, had just begun. Chapter 5. The path to reclaiming. The first few steps on the path to reclaiming herself were excruciatingly difficult. The art class flyer sat on her counter for days, a silent challenge. Finally, with a deep breath and a surge of determination she hadn't known she possessed, Isabel signed up. Her first class was awkward. Her hands, accustomed to the keyboard, felt clumsy holding a paintbrush. The vibrant colors on the palette seemed to mock the dullness she felt inside, but as she tentatively applied paint to canvas, a strange sense of peace began to settle over her. It wasn't about creating a masterpiece. It was about the act of creation itself, a small rebellion against the destruction she had endured. The focus required by the brushstrokes pulled her out of the relentless loop of her thoughts, offering brief, precious moments of respite. Sarah continued to be her anchor. She didn't push, but she was always there, a steady presence. Isabel slowly began to open up, sharing fragments of her pain, the gnawing self, doubt. Sarah listened without judgment, offering validation and reminding Isabel that Mark's actions were a reflection of his character, not hers. His choice was about him, Isabel, not about your worth. These words, repeated gently, began to chip away at the layers of shame. At Sarah's urging, Isabel also sought therapy. The first few sessions were a torrent of tears and anger, a raw outpouring of everything she had suppressed. Dr. Evans, her therapist, was a calm, empathetic presence. She helped Isabel untangle the knotted threads of betrayal, grief, and self-blame. She introduced concepts like gaslighting and emotional abuse, helping Isabel understand the insidious nature of the toxic marriage she had been trapped in, even before the affair was revealed. It wasn't just the affair, it was the slow erosion of her spirit, the subtle manipulation that had made her question her own reality. One of the hardest lessons was setting boundaries. Mark, surprisingly, still tried to maintain a semblance of control, calling occasionally, sending texts that oscillated between feigned concern and thinly veiled accusations. Dr. Evans guided Isabel through the process of asserting her space. She learned to say no, to hang up the phone, to delete messages without reading them. Each act of boundary setting, however small, was a victory, a reclamation of her autonomy. She started small, a walk around the block. Then, tending to her neglected garden, feeling the soil beneath her fingers, watching new life emerge from the earth. She reconnected with old friends she had drifted from during her marriage, realizing how much of her life had revolved solely around Mark. She joined a book club, finding solace and stimulation in shared discussions. The healing wasn't linear. There were days when the despair would return with a vengeance, when the memories would flood her, leaving her gasping for air. Days when she felt utterly alone, broken beyond repair, but now she had tools. She had Sarah's unwavering support, Dr. Evans's guidance, and the quiet strength she was slowly rediscovering within herself. She was learning to rebuild, not just her life, but herself. She was piecing together the shattered fragments of her identity, not into the woman she was before, but into someone stronger, more resilient, and fiercely determined to live a life defined by her own choices, not by someone else's betrayal. The path was long, arduous, and often painful, but for the first time Isabel truly believed she was walking towards something better. Chapter 6, Confronting the Past Months Past, each one a testament to Isabel's quiet perseverance. The gaunt stranger in the mirror was slowly being replaced by a woman with clearer eyes, a softer jawline, and a faint, emerging glow. The pain was still there, a scar tissue forming over the raw wound, but it no longer consumed her. She was learning to live alongside it, to acknowledge it without letting it define her. The opportunity for confrontation arose unexpectedly, yet inevitably. It was at a mutual friend's engagement party, an event Isabel had initially dreaded, knowing Mark would be there, likely with Alice. But Sarah had convinced her to go. "You're not hiding any more, Isabel. You're living your life." She arrived, dressed in a simple, elegant dress that made her feel confident, not invisible. The air was thick with polite chatter and the clinking of glasses. Then she saw them across the room. Mark, looking older, a little more harried than she remembered, and Alice, her arm possessively linked through his. Alice was as she'd imagined, sleek, confident, with a bright, almost predatory smile. A familiar knot tightened in Isabel's stomach, but this time it was different. It wasn't the paralyzing fear of before, but a dull ache of recognition, a faint echo of the past. She took a deep breath, anchoring herself in the present. She was not the same woman they had left behind. Mark saw her first. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even discomfort, crossing his face. He nudged Alice, who then turned, her smile faltering as she recognized Isabel. For a moment the three of them were suspended in a silent tableau, the party noise fading into a distant hum. Isabel didn't flinch. She met their gazes, not with anger or accusation, but with a quiet, almost detached observation. She saw the awkwardness in Mark's posture, the forced casualness in Alice's grip on his arm. They looked ordinary, not the mythical figures who had shattered her world, but just two people, entangled in their own choices. Mark, ever the one to avoid discomfort, started to move away, pulling Alice with him, but Isabel, surprising even herself, took a step forward. "Mark," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the ambient noise. He stopped, turning back reluctantly. Alice's eyes narrowed, a hint of suspicion and defensiveness replacing her earlier discomfort. "I just wanted to say," Isabel continued, her gaze fixed on Mark, "that I hope you're happy, truly." There was no sarcasm in her voice, no bitterness. "Only a genuine, if somewhat distant, wish for peace, and I want you to know that I'm doing well. Better than well, actually." She offered a small, genuine smile. "I'm healing." Mark looked stunned. He stammered, "Isabel, I'm glad, really." The words sounded hollow, forced. He seemed to be searching for something to say, something to fill the vast space between them, but found nothing. Isabel then turned her gaze to Alice. Alice stiffened, her hand tightening on Mark's arm. "Alice," Isabel said, her voice softer, almost compassionate, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Alice's confident facade cracked. Her eyes flickered with something akin to confusion, perhaps even a touch of unease. She hadn't expected this. She had likely anticipated anger, tears, a scene. Not this calm, self-possessed woman who wished them well. Isabel didn't wait for a response. She had said what she needed to say, not for them, but for herself. She had confronted the past, not to demand an apology or an explanation, but to acknowledge her own journey, her own strength. As she turned and walked away, back towards Sarah, who stood watching with a proud smile, Isabel felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The heavy chains of betrayal had finally loosened. She wasn't free of the scars, but she was no longer bound by them. The past was no longer a prison. It was a lesson, and she had learned it well. Chapter 7, New Beginnings. The confrontation at the party, though brief, had been a significant milestone. It was the final, decisive act of cutting the emotional cords that had still, however faintly, tethered Isabel to her past. She had faced her demons, not with fury, but with dignity, and in doing so, had truly set herself free. Life, for Isabel, began to unfold with a renewed sense of purpose and joy. Her art classes blossomed into a genuine passion. She found herself spending hours in her studio, the canvas a vibrant reflection of her inner world, now filled with colors she hadn't known existed. Her paintings, once dark and muted, now burst with light and movement, telling a story of resilience and rebirth. She even started showcasing her work at local community fairs, finding unexpected validation in the admiration of strangers. Her friendships deepened, particularly with Sarah, who had been a steadfast beacon through the darkest days. They shared laughter, tears, and a comfortable companionship that felt more authentic than any relationship she'd had before. She also cultivated new connections through her art and book club, building a diverse and supportive network that enriched her life in countless ways. The house, once a tomb of sorrow, was transformed into a sanctuary of peace and creativity. She redecorated, painting walls in calming hues, filling spaces with art and plants, making it truly her own. The garden, once neglected, now thrived under her care, a metaphor for her own growth and flourishing. Isabel learned to trust herself again, to listen to her intuition, and to honor her own needs. The self-worth she had lost was slowly, painstakingly rebuilt, brick by brick, through every small victory, every act of self-care, every moment of rediscovery. She realized that Mark's choice had never been a reflection of her inadequacy, but a testament to his own unresolved issues and inability to truly commit. The toxic marriage had not diminished her. It had, in a strange, painful way, forged her into a stronger, more authentic version of herself. She wasn't actively looking for romance, content with the rich tapestry of her new life. But sometimes, when she least expected it, life offered gentle surprises. At one of her art shows, she met Daniel, a kind, dyed architect who admired her landscape paintings. Their conversations were easy, flowing, filled with genuine curiosity and shared interests. There was no drama, no games, just a quiet respect and a burgeoning connection. He saw her, truly saw Isabel, without the shadows of her past. She allowed herself to explore this new connection cautiously, mindful of the lessons learned, but open to the possibility of a healthier, more balanced love. It wasn't about finding someone to complete her, she was already whole. It was about finding someone who complimented her, who celebrated her newfound strength, and who understood that true love was built on trust, respect, and unwavering honesty. Isabel often thought back to the woman who had drowned in despair, consumed by betrayal. She felt a pang of empathy for that past self, but also a profound sense of gratitude for the journey. The pain had been immense, the darkness suffocating, but it had also been a crucible, refining her, stripping away what no longer served her, and revealing the fierce, resilient spirit that had always resided within. She stood in her garden one sunny afternoon, the scent of blooming roses filling the air. The scars of the past remained, subtle reminders of where she had been, but they no longer hurt. They were simply a part of her story, a testament to her capacity for healing, for growth, and for embracing new beginnings. Isabel, once shattered, was now whole, vibrant, and utterly free. Her heart, once broken, now beat with a quiet, profound joy, ready for whatever beauty the future held.